The morning of my 32nd birthday, I woke up with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a full minute, trying to catch my breath, trying to separate what was real from what I'd just seen. My sheets were damp. The window AC unit hummed the way it always does in late August. My phone showed 4:47 a.m. in pale blue light. In the dream, my mother had been standing in the kitchen doorway of our old house in Clarksville, the one we grew up in, the one my dad sold 3 years after she passed. She looked the way she did when I was maybe 12 or 13, before the illness, before all of it. Her hair was down. She was wearing the yellow cardigan she used to wear on Saturday mornings when she made pancakes and pretended not to notice that I was sneaking bites of batter from the bowl. She didn't smile when she saw me. That was the first thing I noticed. My mother had a smile that could light up a whole room, and she wore it constantly, even at the end when she had every reason not to. In the dream, she was not smiling. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was genuinely worried, that particular stillness that meant she was choosing her words carefully because the wrong ones might not land. She said, "Don't use what your brother left for you. Just that. Nothing else." She held my eyes for a moment longer, and then I woke up. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and drank the whole thing standing over the sink. I told myself it was just a dream, that my subconscious had pulled her out on my birthday because birthdays are hard now and have been for 4 years, that there was no meaning in it beyond what grief does to a sleeping brain. Then I walked to the dining room table and looked at the gift my brother had dropped off 2 days earlier. It was a skincare set. That was his word for it. When he'd handed it to me, he'd smiled and said, "Happy early birthday, I know you're into that stuff." A white gift box with a pale blue ribbon, the kind you'd pick up at a department store, heavy enough to feel expensive. Inside, a face cream in a dark glass jar, a small bottle of serum, and a body lotion in what looked like a handmade ceramic bottle. All unlabeled except for small printed stickers that said things like, "Renewing Complex and Hydrating Serum" in a minimal font. He'd told me it was from a boutique brand, some small batch skincare company he'd seen featured somewhere. I'd set it aside because I'd been on back-to-back shifts and hadn't had the headspace to think about moisturizer. I stood there looking at that white box at 4:51 inches the morning, my mother's voice still sitting right behind my sternum. And I thought about the fact that my brother had never in 32 years of my life bought me a birthday gift that cost more than a gas station gift card. I did not open the box. I went back to bed and I did not sleep. I need to explain something about my brother before any of the rest of this makes sense. We were never close the way some siblings are close. He's 6 years older than me, which meant we were never really in the same phase of life at the same time. By the time I was old enough to actually have a relationship with him, he was already out of the house and into a series of decisions that my parents dealt with quietly, and I only understood in pieces much later. Dropped out of college. A DUI at 24. 2 businesses that failed within their first year. A marriage that ended before I even knew it had become serious. None of that made him a bad person, necessarily. People have hard stretches. But there was always something about the way he operated that made me feel like I was watching a performance. Like he was running calculations behind his eyes, even when the rest of his face was doing something warm and brotherly. My mother saw it too. She loved him completely and without condition the way mothers do. But I remember her saying once, in a moment she probably forgot almost immediately, "Your brother has a talent for making you feel like you're the only person in the room until he needs something." She had been gone 4 years when he showed up at my apartment 2 days before my birthday with that white box and that smile. Our grandmother had passed 8 months earlier. She had outlived my mother by 3 years and my father by almost a decade, and she had spent her final years in a memory care facility in Nashville that cost more per month than my rent. She'd had a will, drawn up years ago. My mother had been the primary heir, and when my mother predeceased her, the estate was structured to pass in equal shares to my mother's children, meaning my brother and me. Equal shares of a house, some savings, and a piece of land outside of town that had recently become worth considerably more than it had been when the will was written, because a developer had been buying up parcels in that area. My brother had found out about the developer before I had. He'd called me about it in the spring, doing that thing he does where he presents information casually while clearly having thought about it for weeks. He wanted to buy out my share. He had a number in mind. The number was low. I said I needed time to think. He said that was fine. He called again 2 weeks later with the same number. I said I still needed time. He got quieter after that. Not angry, just quiet in a way that felt like weather changing. Then, 8 weeks ago, our grandmother's attorney sent me a letter informing me that, as joint heir, I had the right to initiate a partition action if my brother and I could not agree on disposition of the property. I had not discussed this letter with my brother. I had not told him I'd received it. I had an appointment scheduled with a real estate attorney for the following week. I lay in bed until 6, and then I got up and got dressed for work. I'm a pharmacist, have been for 4 years since I finished my residency. I work at a hospital outpatient pharmacy connected to a research medical center, which means I'm not just counting pills. I work alongside oncology and immunology teams. I review compounding records. I consult on drug interactions. I have access to a toxicology lab through a colleague in the clinical chemistry department. I know what compounds can do to the human body, and I know which ones are designed to look like they're not doing anything at all. I thought about the gift box the entire 40-minute drive to work. I thought about the fact that the bottles inside it were unlabeled beyond generic descriptors. I thought about the fact that my brother had not mentioned the brand name again when I'd thanked him. I thought about the fact that my mother had stood in that doorway with no smile and said 4 words. I told myself I was being irrational. I told myself grief makes you paranoid. I told myself that my brother, whatever his flaws, whatever his financial desperation, whatever the quiet in his voice over the last 2 months, that he was not capable of something that crossed that particular line. I got through my shift. I drove home. I stood in front of the dining room table and looked at that white box for a long time. Then I put on a pair of nitrile gloves from the box I keep under the kitchen sink, and I started examining it. The gift box itself was ordinary. Standard rigid cardboard, the kind used for gift presentation sets. Nothing unusual about the exterior. The ribbon was tied in a way that suggested it had been retied, not dramatically, not obviously, but the bow was slightly asymmetrical in a way that a professionally wrapped store display usually isn't, and there was a faint crease in the ribbon where it had been folded flat and then refluffed. Small detail, maybe nothing. I took the face cream out first. Dark glass jar, good weight, the kind of packaging small luxury brands use to communicate quality. The sticker label was professionally printed. I opened it and looked at the cream, and then, because I'm a pharmacist and this is how my brain works, I took a clean glass slide from the set I keep in a box in my home office. I use them occasionally for checking compounding work I bring home, and I scraped a very small amount of the cream onto the slide and held it under the plane magnifying lamp I use for detail work. It looked like face cream. I didn't learn anything from that. I opened the serum bottle. Clear liquid, faint floral scent, plausible. I set it aside. Then I picked up the ceramic lotion bottle. It was heavier than it should have been. Not dramatically, you wouldn't notice it if you were just unwrapping a gift and setting things on your bathroom shelf. But I was holding it with attention, and it was approximately 15 to 20% heavier than a ceramic bottle of that size filled with lotion should reasonably be. I know this because I've handled a lot of compounding containers, and you develop a sense for the weight-to-volume relationship of different preparations. I set it back down and looked at it. The ceramic was matte white with a thin wax seal around the lid, the kind that presents as artisanal. I broke the seal carefully and twisted the lid, and the smell that came out was almost right, almost the faintly sweet, slightly botanical smell of a premium body lotion, but under it there was something else. Something astringent and faintly medicinal that the added fragrance hadn't quite covered. I put the lid back on. I stood in my kitchen for a moment with my gloved hands flat on the counter. I was very calm. I noticed that I was very calm in the specific way that happens when you understand something clearly and the clarity hasn't yet become feeling. I resealed the lotion bottle as well as I could. I put all 3 products back in the box. I put the box into a paper grocery bag and then into a larger Ziploc bag. I wrote the date and time on a strip of masking tape and put it across the seal. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor, still in my work clothes, and I stayed there for a while. The next morning I went to work an hour early and found my colleague in the clinical chemistry lab before his shift properly started. He's a toxicologist. We've worked together for 2 years. I trust him in the specific way you trust someone who is precise and incurious about things that aren't his professional business. I told him I had a product I needed screened. I told him I had reason to believe it might contain something it wasn't supposed to. I didn't tell him anything else, and he didn't ask. He logged it as an anonymous consumer product submission, which is not unusual. We occasionally assist with those, and told me to come back the next day. That day was the longest day I can remember. My brother called me that afternoon. He called to wish me happy birthday, he said. His voice was exactly warm enough. He asked if I'd had a chance to try the skincare set. I said I'd been busy with back-to-back shifts and hadn't had time yet. He said he hoped I'd get to it soon, that he thought I'd really like the lotion in particular. I said I was sure I would. He said we should get dinner sometime soon and talk about the property. I said yes, of course. We said goodbye. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a while after that call. My colleague came to find me the next morning before I even made it to the pharmacy floor. He wasn't alarmed exactly, but he was very focused in the way that people who work in that field get focused when something is wrong. The lotion contained a compound that did not belong there. I won't use the technical name here because it doesn't matter for the purposes of what I'm telling you. What matters is what he explained to it. It was a substance that could be absorbed transdermally through the skin with repeated use. It would not cause immediate acute symptoms. It would cause a gradual deterioration in liver function over a period of weeks to months, presenting as fatigue, jaundice, nausea symptoms that in a young woman might be attributed to overwork, stress, viral illness. In high enough concentrations and with consistent exposure, it could cause liver failure. It would be extremely difficult to identify without specifically testing for it, because it was not a commonly screened substance. He asked me where the product had come from. I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me if I wanted him to document this formally. I said yes. I want to tell you what it feels like to sit with that information, to hold in your body the knowledge that someone you grew up with, someone who ate breakfast at the same table as you for years, someone your mother loved, made a decision, and carried out the steps of that decision with enough planning and patience to source something that would take months to kill you and would probably never be traced back to him. It doesn't feel like rage right away. I think people expect rage. What it actually feels like first is a strange cold stillness, like the air in a room just before the temperature drops. It feels like the floor shifting very slightly under your feet. It feels like looking at a photograph you've seen your entire life and suddenly noticing something in the background that changes what the picture means. I called our mother's attorney that afternoon. Then I called a detective I'd worked with once on a prescription fraud case 2 years earlier. I explained what I had. I explained the documentation my colleague had generated. I explained the inheritance situation. The detective listened without interrupting. At the end, she asked me if I had kept the product secured. I said yes. She asked me not to contact my brother. I did not contact my brother. What came next happened over the following 10 days in a way that I mostly experienced from the outside, providing documentation, answering questions, sitting across a conference table from investigators while the evidence was reviewed. It turned out that the sourcing of the compound was traceable. It turned out that my brother had consulted with a financial advisor 6 weeks earlier about liquidating a significant inheritance asset contingent on sole ownership. It turned out that the specific boutique skincare company he'd claimed to purchase the gift from did not exist in any business registry. He was arrested on a Wednesday. He didn't call me. His attorney contacted me 3 days later with a message I did not respond to. There's a thing that happens after something like this where the people around you want the story to be about you, almost escaping something about the near miss, about the danger that was averted. And yes, that is part of it. I understand that if I had put that lotion on my skin the morning of my birthday the way I might have on any other morning, with any other gift, from anyone who hadn't made me uneasy in a way I couldn't name, things would have gone differently. I understand that the outcome depends on a sequence of choices I made that I might just as easily not have made. But that isn't the part that stays with me. What stays with me is standing in my kitchen at 4:50, 1 inches the morning with a glass of water, with her voice still hanging in the air, looking at a white box with a pale blue ribbon. I know there are people who will read this and find 100 rational explanations for a dream that happened to align with something real. I've had those conversations. I'm a scientist. I understand the arguments. I'm not asking anyone to accept anything they're not willing to accept. What I know is that I grew up watching my mother read a room before she walked all the way into it. I know that she spent 30 years paying closer attention to my brother than he ever realized. I know that she loved him, and she knew exactly what he was capable of, and those two things were never in conflict for. Her love never made her less clear-eyed, it just meant the clarity cost her more. I think she was paying attention even at the end. I think she is paying attention still. My grandmother's estate is in the process of being settled with my brother's legal situation factored in. The attorney has been clear with me about what that means and what the likely timeline looks like. I'm not going to talk about the specifics here because some of it is still ongoing and I was advised to keep it that way. What I will say is that for the first time in almost a year, I have not picked up the phone after a call from my brother and felt that cold current of unease moving through my chest. It's not that the grief is gone for what my grandmother left behind, for what my brother turned out to be, for the version of our family I think I'd been quietly grieving for a long time without naming it. The grief is still there, but the fear is gone. That particular kind of ambient dread that you carry around and tell yourself is just anxiety, just stress, just the baseline hum of being a person in the world I didn't know, until it lifted how much of it had been specific, how much of it had been pointing at something real. I went home the night the arrest was confirmed and I poured myself a glass of wine and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I wasn't thinking about the property or the compound or the investigators' questions. I was thinking about a kitchen doorway in Clarksville and a yellow cardigan and a face that looked at me without smiling because there wasn't time for smiling, because there was something I needed to understand. I said thank you out loud, to no one, to the empty apartment, to whatever it is that lingers in the space between what we know and what we can't explain. I like to think she heard me. I like to think she always does.